I have been using the All About Reading program with my 6 kids for years now, and I wanted to come today and share with you guys 10 of the biggest mistakes that I made when teaching this program. Some of these happened many years ago, and others have been a constant on and off struggle. So let me help save you some time and energy and effort and help you to make the most of this amazing program. So let's get started. The first thing I did wrong was helping too much, or actually more correctly put, helping in the wrong way. It's very easy when you are dealing with a struggling reader or a new reader for you to interject or fill in the missing pieces, for you to give them the letter sound. All of a sudden, they become dependent on you when it comes to reading. And you'll know you're falling into this trap if you watch your kids and they frequently look up at your eyes and your face and try to read the word instead of looking at the page. This happens all the time, and I used to get really frustrated by this with my kids until I realized that I was the one that had kind of created this problem. If they started to say the wrong sound for a letter, I would give them the right sound instead of giving them a second to try and self-correct. So how do we solve something like this? Well, we give our kids a little bit of time to correct themselves. Oftentimes, kids will correct themselves when they start to read a word wrong. So if the word is B-A-T and they read it at, dat, once they say the whole word out loud, oftentimes they'll realize there's something wrong with that. That's not a real word. And they'll go back and fix their problem. If your child doesn't have problems with words, but maybe skips over words or changes the words, let them finish a couple of words or even a whole sentence before correcting them. You have to kind of gauge it on your child's specific needs, and you don't want it to be too far away from the mistake or too close. So there's going to be a little bit of ebb and flow and learning from your specific child and what they need, but give them a minute to correct it themselves. A good rule of thumb is to count to 5 in your head and give them a second after they have made the mistake to correct it. The second mistake that I made was the length of our lessons. I would have one of two extremes. Either I was like, we're gonna finish a lesson in a day no matter what, even if you're struggling, which definitely led to frustration and a lack of mastery because sometimes they needed a couple of days to finish a lesson. Or on the flip side, I would tend to gauge how long we were going to stay in a lesson based on how well they were doing. If they were doing well, then I'm like, let's keep going and keep going and keep going. And if they were struggling, I'd be like, all right, fine, we're done. We're calling it, right? And I'd wait till that point of serious frustration and then call it as good. The problem with both of these methods is they don't take into account your child's needs, and they don't take into account the idea that we ideally want to end our reading lessons on a semi-good note. If you wait till the absolute point of frustration, and I'm not talking a child is struggling reading something, I'm talking there are tears, you're getting frustrated, they're getting frustrated. If you wait to that point to finish your lessons, you are going to find that you don't want to go back to your lessons the next day. And that's exactly what happened with us. I have kids with dyslexia, and we were waiting to that point of frustration every single day, and then I wouldn't want to pick up the next day. And so we might have like gaps where we weren't consistent in our practice, which is going to cause more frustration and more problems. It also taught my kids that, hey, if you're doing a good job and this is not a struggle for you, I'm gonna make you do even more work, which they felt was unfair and truly kind of was. So the solution to this problem is to set your timer for 15 to 20 minutes. 20 minutes for my family was kind of the sweet spot, but if you have a really struggling learner or a very young learner, you may want to sit with 15 minutes. Set that timer, and no matter where you are in your lesson, go ahead and stop your lesson and move on. The next day you can pick up right where you left off and finish it off, and your child will know what's expected of them. You'll more than likely end up ending your lesson on a good note so that you actually are okay going back to it the next day, and it keeps things fairly fair. My third mistake is neglecting the review. If I'm pushing my kids to their frustration point and we're maybe skipping a few days, then guess what was the first thing to get cut out of our lessons? The review. But the review is what helps your child master the material and makes them feel more confident. Sometimes I would set that timer to 15 or 20 minutes and I felt like all we did was review. That's okay. The idea is the more you review the concepts, the more you go over the flashcards that they tell you to use in the curriculum, the more they're going to master that material. And yeah, you might spend a couple of days on 15 minutes of just review and not getting to new material, but that means in the future, you can fly through that review and go into lessons more confidently. My fourth mistake was not incorporating breaks effectively. So I had heard, and I'm sure many of you guys have heard as well, if your child is struggling with reading, especially if they are younger and especially if they are a boy and they're not getting it, then you should just stop. Just take a break, step back, don't do anything, and then revisit it later and maybe they will be able to do better. And while there is a lot of truth to this statement, that sometimes our kids are just simply not ready, I do wish that I would have still incorporated some things during that break time. And what I mean by that is just practicing some of the things they do have down, right? Just strengthening the areas that they already were confident in. So maybe they weren't ready to go on to that next level. Maybe there was sort of a gap in their learning and they needed a little bit more time to mature and grow between level 1 and 2. But we could have still spent that time going over the things in level 1 to keep those skills sharp and fresh and to help ensure more success. This is something that my friend Wendy over at Plan Prep Pray did with her son. She took about a 6-month break from him with his reading because she noticed there was a lot of struggle. But during that time, she still reviewed flashcards of things he had previously learned. She still worked on letter sounds. She just didn't introduce any new concepts. And I really wish that's something that I would have done. The 5th thing that I did that was a mistake was skipping the 20-minute reading habit. So at the end of every All About Reading lesson, they encourage you to read with your child or have your child read to you 20 minutes a day. And here is why I did not want to do that. I had already done 20 minutes of lessons with that child. And truthfully, I have 6 kids and sometimes had 4 children in this program at one point. So that's over an hour that I was already spending every single day with my kids doing formal reading lessons. So to spend an extra 20 minutes with reading just seemed like a lot. What I neglected to realize is that 20 minutes of reading doesn't necessarily have to be done by the child. They can listen to audiobooks or hear me read to all of the kids at one time. For my older kids who did need that practice of reading aloud, and it wasn't just enough to be hearing the 20 minutes of reading a day, I realized that I could outsource that. I could have them read 20 minutes to another sibling. I could have them read 20 minutes to dad when he got home from work. You can even utilize technology and FaceTime grandparents or a friend and have the child read to them for 20 minutes. These things are really, really helpful for building those skills and helping them get more stamina. And even when it comes to audiobooks or hearing someone read aloud to them, even if you're not going to have your child read out loud for 20 minutes, it still teaches them the cadence and the tone, how to stop or how to have inflection with your voice, which will help them become stronger readers. Number 6 was skipping over the letter tiles. So within the teacher's book, you will see that they give you pictures of the letter tiles. Their idea is that you will either use the letter tiles or the letter tiles app to build the words and move and manipulate them around. And instead, for a small season of time, I was just kind of in survival mode and was like, all right, I'm just gonna have you read out of the book. There's the color tiles here, you can do that. The problem is my kids needed that kinesthetic opportunity to move and manipulate the letter tiles. There's actually a lot to be learned when they have a word that's all together and they have to physically move the letter tiles or physically move them on the app to separate them. They get more of a visual and a better physical understanding of separating syllables and then understanding which syllable tags go above each of those things. I highly recommend checking out one or both of these resources. There's letter tiles that are magnetic that you can use with your child, or if you want, the letter tile app is also a great choice as something that's a little bit more mobile and has less pieces that you have to keep track of. But I do recommend not skipping this step. Number 7 was not always using the reading comprehension questions. Again, not all of these mistakes that I make all the time, and there are seasons where you're not going to be able to do everything as well as you wish. But I will say that the reading comprehension questions that All About Reading incorporates into their lessons are there for a reason. Every time your child is reading a book out of their reader, which in the older 3 levels are pretty much every other lesson, they're going to be reading out of their storybook. They have questions to have you ask beforehand, questions to ask afterwards, which I had always gotten to those 2, but they also have questions that you can ask at different points in the story. Now, for some, you might be very natural in asking your kids comprehension questions and checking for understanding. And if that's the case, maybe you don't need to do this step. But for many of us, we struggle with, other than saying, well, what happened? We struggle having variety in our questions and making sure that they're understanding what's going on. This also helps us to ensure comprehension as well as being able to have that fluency in story reading. I have seen children who can read it beautifully, but have no idea what they just read, and other kids who can really struggle with reading and yet fully understand the material, and vice versa. So just something to keep in mind. Number 8 is choosing to skip material because you think a child has mastered it. I see this all the time in the homeschooling community, and not just in reading, in all areas, where families will see what a child can do and they'll just assume with reading, well, they can pick up and read a second grade reading book, and so they don't even need to worry about that level. They can just skip over it. Sometimes that might be true. The child may truly have mastered the material that would be taught in level 2. The problem is oftentimes kids are using a lot of memory, right? Some kids are very, very visual, and they can see a word and they know what it means, and they never have to sound it out ever again. The challenge with this is they won't be able to translate that to words they have never seen before. And one of the strengths of All About Reading is that it's teaching the phonics rules so that they can take any word that they've never seen before and still be able to break it down. It's teaching the method behind reading, not just actually teaching reading words. So if your child is able to pick up the reader and start reading through the whole thing with no problems, don't assume you've put them in the wrong level. I highly recommend checking out the placement tests on the All About Reading website to make sure that you have the appropriate level for your child, and then sticking with that, even if you feel like it's a little too simple. If it is, then in 15-20 minutes, you should be able to get through a lesson or two, no problem. And that time will not be wasted because they will be mastering that methodology and not just reading the actual list. Number 9 is overloading a child with new material, or thinking you can't introduce something unless it is new material. So one of the things I heard many times when I was doing All About Reading with my oldest son was just have them read this story over and over again. So if they're struggling with something, maybe circle back to a story. And that's something that I very rarely did because I was like, well, he already knows how it's going to turn out. He already knows the answer. But the truth is, how many things do we already know that we've already read and we continue to reread? There are things that when a child rereads a story or rereads information, they will learn more and grasp more. They will be able to work on that tone and inflection, maybe being better at when it says, come inside, mom said. They can say, come inside, mom said, instead of come inside, mom said, right? There are different aspects that they can work on by repeating information. It doesn't always have to be brand new to them. This is true too as your child starts to begin to read books outside of the All About Reading program. There is nothing wrong with, and actually is oftentimes a huge strength with kids with dyslexia specifically, in having them read with their eyes something for the first time that they've already read with their ears in like an audiobook. This gives them some context clues, and they don't have to spend all their time focusing on understanding the story or on the reading comprehension aspect. They can just focus on the mechanics of reading, because when the mechanics of reading are already hard, the comprehension is going to be really, really difficult as well. So giving them a leg up with that can be really helpful. 10 was underestimating the power of consistency. As I said earlier, sometimes in the early years of using All About Reading, we would take large gaps of a day or two. We'd only end up doing reading about 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and that created a lot more problems for me. I learned that it is better to show up even for 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day, to show up and practice reading consistently than it is to have longer lessons. And what this can look like if your child is having a rough day or you're super busy that day and you know you can't dedicate a whole 15 to 20 minutes for a lesson for that day, at least pull out different activities you can use for review. Still touch the material, still practice a few words or a few phonemes. This is really important. If you guys want to learn more about how you can review with your kids, be sure to subscribe, because I'm going to have a video coming out next month all about this topic, about fun ways to incorporate more review with the All About Reading program, or any reading program really, that will make your child learn to love the review process and not have to be just a drill and kill flashcard method. If you want to know more about the All About Reading program, check this video out here with 10 things you need to know.